Hey, today we're going to look at rigor and specifically what it looks like in the classroom. Rigor is one of those words in education where if you ask five teachers what is it or what's their definition for it, you may get five different answers. For that reason, I think it's important to try to define it as best we can, and more than define it, try to give examples of what it looks like, and then how do we quantify it, or how do we measure it, or how do we see it. So at its core, rigor is results. Rigor is something students do, not something that is given to them. Any classroom can be rigorous. It does not matter on the level of the students in the class. Even students who are projected at a very low level, they can still do rigorous work. So here's what rigor isn't. Rigor is not the work that is given to students. It's what students do with that work. And more importantly, it should go more away from teacher directive to student self-guided. It is not something that is standardized, but it is individual to the students within the class. And even within that, rigor could change day to day depending on what the students are doing. And it's not about how much, but about how much you get out of it. It's the depth of understanding. For example, there's a kind of a trend for students to do more and more and more homework. That's not necessarily more rigorous because it is all about the depth of understanding. If they could do one thing for 20 minutes that is, more self-guided, more self-exploratory, then that is more rigorous than something that is 2 hours that is just rote recall memorization. There's a time and a place for both of those things, maybe. But rigor, as far as we're going to define it, we're going to use this rubric here. Sorry. So we will be using this rubric, which I will break down in a second, to show you more in-depthly what rigor looks like in the classroom as it's happening. There's three indicators: thoughtful work, high-level questioning, and academic discussion. And each of those can be broken up into two subtopics. We have student learning and instructional design. Instructional design happens in the planning process. It is what's the rigor going into the lesson that you want students to produce out of it. The student learning aspect is what does it look like in real time as the lesson is happening? What is the student learning? So we have beginning, emerging, developed, and well developed. And as you move on down here to well developed, you'll see that it really goes from teacher directive to almost all student self-guided self-discovery. So breaking down that thoughtful work. Over here, you could see the language, the indicators that define each topic. So we have beginning, emerging, developed, well developed. So over here at beginning, we're seeing that the work is more memorization. It's recall, retell. These are questions, or these are problems, or this is work that has one right answer. There's one thing you need to get out of it. So that's really not that rigorous, because this is, again, what the teacher wants students to learn, and it stops there. It's very low level. As we start to get to emerging, we're starting to use that content. So we're maybe applying it to different things. It shows us that we have comprehension of the entire lesson or whatever content it is that we're learning. When we get to develop, now we're problem solving kind of organically. Maybe we're putting it into scenarios. We have inquiry happening. There's interpretation. Now this is starting to be student directive. They're starting to have ownership of the content. They're starting to have an opinion on it, and they can predict and analyze and synthesize and all those things. And once you get to well-developed, thoughtful work is really self-discovery. It's students using that content as a springboard to propel them to their own learning. And this here, well-developed for thoughtful work, really the teacher is not involved that much. As a facilitator, yes, but as the steward of knowledge, no. Over here, it's almost like we're getting things out of a book, and as we start to apply that knowledge, you can see that students really can take this and do a lot of different things with it. But the point here is it empowers students, and it not only empowers, it engages students and encourages students to learn in their own way. So it very much is differentiated. Going on to high-level questioning, these are the questions that um, are in the lesson, embedded in the lesson, not necessarily asked, but these are the questions that are guiding that learning. So the beginning again is that recall, retell. So these are questions that have a very basic answer, low level content knowledge, maybe one right answer. Over here we have emerging. Now we have to have a comprehension of the entire content to compare and contrast or to do something more with it. Over here, we have question and answers that have to have a full range of thinking, not just to the content that we're learning at the time, but to a broader spectrum. This is more justified and thought out, but it's also connected to relevancy and prior student knowledge. Students generate their own questions. Students starting to have inquiry around the content. These are more teacher generated. These are teacher driven, teacher directive, and now we're starting to get to student. And once you get to that well developed, now it's peer to peer challenging. It's peers answering peers with very little guidance from the teacher. It's students really inspiring other students to take the content and go further with it. And then this really parallels the academic discussion. If you have very few kids talking to kids about content, you're over here in the beginning emerging. If kids are only answering the teacher ever, then that is beginning. That's that recall, retell. The teacher is getting more out of that than the student. As far as emerging goes, once you start scaffolding up, you're starting to get this higher level vocab use. You're starting to have to prove or defend an idea using vocab. Once you get to develop, now we're not using vocab in isolation, but with each other, and we're synthesizing, analyzing, evaluating. That conversation is starting to be a student-generated conversation. These are the students' ideas that are propelling that academic discussion forward. And then finally, when we have well-developed, we have students that are entirely self-driven, self-motivated, and that inquiry is, again, going in a direction that the teacher has not no control over, but doesn't mandate ahead of time. The students are driving the discussion. The students are talking to students about what this content means or what the vocab means, and they are taking that academic discussion and challenging each other. The idea amongst all this is maybe you start that conversation here and eventually the teacher kind of weans themselves out of it and the students take it over. This well-developed doesn't have to necessarily happen for any of them the entire class the whole time at first. There is a time and a place to start with that recall, retell, and then you scaffold up. But if you stay here, then that work is not being rigorous, or the questioning or the discussion is not rigorous for the students. So in summation, and the final point is rigor at its core is about the students learning. And if you challenge students and you empower students to learn in new ways and to learn things that they are passionate about and relevant about, it has nothing to do with the amount or the hardness of the content you're giving them. It has everything to do about knowing your students and knowing what direction they need to go to explore and learn on their own. And really that teacher takes a back step as we get more and more rigorous work. But a lot of that has to happen in planning. So, all right, hope that clarifies what rigor looks like in your classroom or what you can start to push students towards. Have a great day. Thank you.